So today we really do have the executive director of the Friends of the Cobbossee Watershed joining us, Tamara Whitmore, and the talk that she's giving is Going with the Flow, Community-Based Watershed Learning. I'm helping. I had originally put my name on here as a co-presenter, but I'm really not doing much. Tamara's really taking the lead on all of this. So and I'll hand it over to her in just a second, but just, I think I met Tamara, it might have been literally like 17 years ago, because I think you had maybe just started with the Friends of the Cobbossee and I had just started with Maine Audubon. And I have this very distinct memory of meeting you at a conference or a workshop or something. And so I'm glad our paths crossed early and they've crossed again. So Tamara does an amazing job at Friends of the Cobbossee Watershed. If you've ever visited their website or come across any of their work, great organization, and really excited to have Tamara share this talk with us today. So for my introduction, I'll just give a little quick reminder that our theme this year would have been at the conference if we'd been in person, but for our Wednesday webinars is celebrating 50 years of the Clean Water Act. So I changed up my photos a little bit. So these are just some of the scenes that would have been typical in 1972 when the Clean Water Act came to be. I mean, we're very lucky. Not many of Maine's lakes look like this, but these were industrial rivers and lakes across the country. Although Maine did have its problems, and I'm sure you've all seen, I've used in other webinars, I've shown pictures of the Androscoggin at its worst. So we know Maine did have its share of dirty water problems that the Clean Water Act really worked to improve. And that's good, because this is what we're doing it for, right? We want to give all of these young people, we want them to give them a place of joy, places where they can be outdoors, get exercise, become familiar with, become really in awe, connect them to the natural world, and let them have fun. And of course, we want clean water for them to do all those activities in. And of course, and it's not just for today, for the immediate gratification we all get when we see kids like this, or when we're enjoying clean water. We really have a vested interest in making sure kids like this are informed, and that they know about freshwater systems, and they know the risks to freshwater systems, because there are future leaders, and they are going to be the ones who are going to be protecting the resource in the future. So the better equipped they are to understand our freshwater systems, the better we will all be in the future. And that all kind of vaguely ties back to the Clean Water Act and giving us, this connection to this clean water resource. So I'll just, my part of the talk, like I said, is not doing much, but I do want to just sort of set the stage for environmental education in Maine, and specifically freshwater education. So, I think most people are pretty familiar with environmental education, and I think I'll let Tamara's much better equipped to give the spiel if she wants on just general what environmental education is. It's not just science. It's not just the outdoors. My very layperson sort of explanation of environmental education is that it really covers a huge array of interdisciplinary topics. It's about problem solving. It's about working together. It's about sort of project-based experiential learning. So it's a great, and it's really, I thought about actually thinking about the Clean Water Act and how the Clean Water Act might have influenced environmental education. It certainly came about at the same time that there was early environmental education for sure, but environmental education as a science, really, as a field, really exploded, in the last few decades. And I think it could be, some of it can certainly be attributed to our environmental awareness that really helped us get to the Clean Water Act. So, but lots of organizations in Maine doing environmental education. So lots of regional watershed organizations that I've put up here. There's consultants like Ecological Instincts that do environmental education programming around freshwater. There's me at the bottom, the tree logo there is the Maine Environmental Education Association. They are really leading the charge in terms of keeping people organized and collaborating. But so we're not starting from scratch here in Maine if we're talking about watershed education or freshwater education. So I just wanted to put that up as a reminder. Lots of organizations doing great work around watershed education. And then I just want to make a quick, I'll just do this. My last slide really is to talk about Maine Lakes' role in environmental education. So, you know, you could, another thing about environmental education is it's really sort of cradle to grave. There's really, it's not necessarily a kid oriented thing. There's lots of adult environmental education going on all the time. And I'd say that Maine Lakes does a lot of that. We have a lot of outreach programming. Our Lake Smart program is really geared toward, is really an environmental education program. But we did for many years, maybe some of you have joined us on one of our Lakes Alive trips. We inherited the Melinda Ann, which was a massive 32-foot pontoon boat when the Maine Lakes Conservancy Institute folded. That was their focus was really traveling with the Melinda Ann, and they had some pretty revolutionary things at the time about they had a portal where kids would collect information and report it to a portal, and had some really great things going for it. It didn't survive as a nonprofit. We inherited the Melinda Ann, and we did for many years. We did boat trips like the one in the center top, where we would take kids out, and it would often be part of a series of visits we would do with kids in classrooms, and but take them out on the water, do some sampling. We would pull up invertebrates. We'd pull up cold water from the bottom of the lakes to talk about temperature. So it's very hands-on. And for anyone who did it, who went through the program, teachers and parents, I know it had a big impact on kids and parents and the educators who went with it, because there is really, and as any of you know, there's nothing like taking kids out and having them do things and be active and participate in collecting information, and it's just an incredibly meaningful experience. Sadly for us, it wasn't a model that we could sustain, because we're a statewide organization. The boat was really big. The season of freshwater education in the field is pretty limited in terms of school groups. So we had a limited window to operate with schools. And then our primary focus was visiting lake associations. Lake associations would sponsor us to come and visit their communities. So it was a great model. It was a great experience. The model didn't work. It was had to travel too far. It was too expensive, and the boat was just aging and needed some maintenance. So last year we made the decision to shutter our boat education program, and that really left Maine Lakes with the question of what should we do? We're a statewide organization. We definitely want education as part of and youth education as part of our mission, and we see it as part of our mission, but how are we best suited to help move freshwater education forward? So I'll hand it over to Tamara. I'll come back to that question, but that's where a lot of Maine Lakes interest in environmental education has come from lately, is asking questions about what's going on in the state, who's doing what, and how we can be best involved. So with that very long-winded introduction, Tamara, I'll hand it over to you, and I'll stop sharing my screen.
Well, thank you so much. And actually, would you mind making me the co-host so I can
Oh,
share
right.
my screen? And welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I'm not used to webinar format. I'm used to more of a back and forth, very used to Zoom meetings at this point. But to sort of find out who we have in our group, if you would take a moment to, just as Nancy has done in the chat, put in your name and the organization or your affiliation or your school, and then what you're hoping to get out of today's webinar. Hopefully I can touch on that, or we can have some questions about that later. So that would be really awesome. Let's see, who can share? So now it looks like I can I? Let's see. And share, and then we'll hopefully get this. Oh man, let's see if this. Okay, and then start the slideshow. Alrighty. Now the big question is, can everybody see, including the attendees? Okay, great.
Yep.
So sharing in in the chat, your name, your organization, school or affiliation, and what you're hoping to get out of today's webinar. Great. I'm going back just so what I'm hoping to share with you today is the results of something called the Census of Community-Based Environmental Learning in Maine, focusing on the water education that was happening in the state 3 years ago. Talk about some past collaborations of different groups working on water education in the state. Talking, sort of pulling out of one of those collaborations, something that we're calling watershed learning principles. And then having Susan jump in again with the current collaboration that Maine Lakes is really pushing forward. And then wrapping it up with a sort of a where do we go from here? How do we raise all boats at the same time, and ideas for next steps in collaborating and funding. And it's my hope to put in as many water related puns as possible. And maybe, just maybe I'll dabble a little bit with Star Wars. Okay, so I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Tamara Whitmore, and I'm currently the Executive Director of the Friends of the Cobbossee Watershed. My diving into the watershed education really happened back in 2005, when, as part of my my graduate work at Antioch, I took an AmeriCorps position with the Maine Department of Environmental Protection and their watershed division. And I was an environmental educator. And so I got to go out throughout the state, working with different residential camps, different soil and water conservation districts, and schools, community centers. It was really, I really sort of headfirst into that. So I really loved it, and I wanted to continue. And thankfully, the Friends of the Cobbossee Watershed was hiring in 2007 for their education director. So I got that job, and was heading up our education programs from 2006 through 2013, when at the end of that I stepped into the executive director role. So I have a real passion. This is of my two main passions in life. This is promoting freshwater, any water education, helping people conduct water education, and helping the general public just understand why it's so important, that every action that we do is really important. So it really is sort of a labor of love. And I'm sharing here maps of the Cobbossee Watershed. So on the left, you see the main major river drainages, and there's a yellow section down on sort of the central southern portion of the state. That's the Cobbossee Watershed. And then on the right, And I should probably make this small so you can see it. Okay. And on the right is the Cobbossee Watershed. It is 217 square miles just west of Augusta, 28 major lakes and ponds and streams. Yeah. Our education programs are now led by amazing educator, Cami Wilbert, and we go into school systems free of charge and do what we call watershed science program, working really with all ages and really focusing in on what the kids need to know, connecting watershed principles to the other learning standards that they need to learn, and really using the water that is around them that they see every day driving on the roads. They're not driving, hopefully, but on the roads on their way to school, just giving a sense of place by using those waters they see all the time. And one part of our watershed science program is something called Classroom to Streams. And that's where students are raising brook trout eggs and then in the classroom and then releasing them into a stream. In fact, we're going to be going and doing a field trip tomorrow with 57 fifth graders from Richmond and releasing some trout into the stream there. Down in the left corner, there is a picture of our summer nature day camp. Cami runs nature day camps during the school vacation periods, and that really gives students an opportunity to really connect to nature and have those aha moments. And then on the bottom right is our boat. We have a boat called the Otter 2. It's a 22-foot pontoon boat. We call it a floating classroom, and very similar to the programs that were run on Melinda Ann. We run programs for really kids of all ages to learn about the lake environments. We use an underwater camera to see what's going on underneath there. We catch plankton and take a look at it under microscopes, and we learn how to test water quality. So it's as Susan had mentioned, it's a way to connect them to this lake ecosystem and then also give them the tools to realize, okay, we have impacts as humans and we can also make decisions that will help protect them. So that's just a little bit about our organization and what we do. And I know there's a lot of great organizations throughout the state that do similar work. So for this conversation, I'm using this amazing resource. It's called the Community-Based Environmental Learning. It was basically a landscape analysis of the environmental education that was happening throughout the state. It was published in 2019, and I tell you, it was some heroic work done by some amazing people at Maine Mathematics and Science Alliance. As far as the data analysis. And the other partner was the Maine Environmental Education Association. And what it really does is it creates this baseline of understanding of, you know, where the work is being done and where there might be weaknesses, how we might better help these types of programs throughout the state. And this baseline is going to be updated on a regular basis. I would really urge you to go visit it. You can find it at the mmsa.org/projects. And I can't see the last part of that because of my screen. But so if you go to the Maine Math and Science Alliance website, it is there. And it's a really beautifully done report. And it's really useful, and I'm going to show you why and how it's useful. And also just a little asterisk there on the fact that this survey is going to be updated. It's actually going to be updated this year in 2022. So I'll come back to that in just a moment. So some of the information that can be called out of this survey, if you look at the whole, all of the environmental education projects that are going throughout the state. In response to this survey, 479 individuals responded from 434 schools and organizations. So sometimes there was 2 people reporting from the same organization, like I know Cami and I reported from the Friends. But what that boils down to is 405 projects. I believe that refers to either curricula or educational programs or activities that are being done throughout the state. And so the really cool thing is that they had respondees from all 16 counties. 20%, respondees covered 20% of all the schools in Maine, 30% of the libraries, 40% of the land trusts, and 28% of those residential camps, and numerous, of course, environmental and education nonprofits. So what we're going to do is we're just going to slice this down a little bit and really focus in on water. So here's a map of all the water-related projects that were found during this 2019 census. You can see by the legend that the most amount of projects, 21 related to water, were being reported out in Cumberland County, which kind of makes sense based on population. And then secondly, in Hancock County, and that doesn't surprise me either, really, based on the geographic and just the connection to water there. Drilling down further. So here's these 87 projects that were reported on related to water. That was 22% of the total project sample. So out of 405 environmental education projects, 22% of them were reported as water related. And that broke out into 52% of those projects were being done in schools, and 48% of them were being done in organizations. I know that the new 2022 census is going to do a little bit of focusing on those school and organization partnerships. So that should be really interesting to learn more about in the future. But there's different types of water in this beautiful state. So marine ecosystem projects accounted for 15 of those 87 total water projects. And they actually are able to break it down for us in terms of schools. Like, so 10 schools were doing those types of projects, breaks it down into grades. And then 5 organizations were doing that type of work and breaks it down even into type of organization, which is just amazing to me. Marine, we have marine there, and then fisheries and aquaculture projects, which really makes sense because of the connection that we have in this state to that industry. So 29 projects had that connection, and that was in 16 schools and 13 different organizations. And you can see it's pretty close to the, the coastal areas, which does make sense. And last but not least, the freshwater watershed project locations. And you'll probably notice that I kind of use freshwater and watershed interchangeably. That could be wrong, but at this point, I think it's okay. So there was the majority of those watershed projects were in freshwater and watershed because it's so much of our state. So that was 43 projects, 19 schools, and 24 organizations. And I have to tell you, I think I know several of them as far as the land trust / watershed protection / land protection area. So a lot of really cool stuff is happening. I really do think this is only a part of it. So I'm hoping in promoting this survey, I'm hoping that everyone on this webinar might be looking for it in the future to be involved. And if there is water education happening associated with your organization, to fill out that survey coming up in later on in the year. So that, speaking of that 2022 census, the folks that are really taking the lead is now sort of referred to as Teach Me Outside, which is a collaboration between the Nature-Based Education Consortium, the Maine Environmental Education Association, and the Maine Math and Science Alliance. And all of this amazing work is being done with support by the Pisces Foundation and Elmina B. Sewell Foundation. And when I say, I think I've used the word amazing way too many times when it comes to this, but this is groundbreaking stuff. And so this work is being shared throughout the nation and in comparison to other states, and it's really, really exciting. I should also mention I'm on the board of Maine Environmental Education Association, have been since 2007. So of course, I think this is extremely exciting. But I want to delve into, so that sort of gives us a sense of where water education is happening, at least as of 3 years ago. I want to share an example of when our groups sort of start to work together to greaten or further our impact. I remember when I was in AmeriCorps, the Maine DEP would gather people throughout the state to get together, have a meeting, share resources, share lesson ideas. It was really great. But I will say since probably 2008 or 9, things just sort of, the state didn't have the same capacity to really take the lead in this sort of education. So I think it's even more imperative for our smaller organizations, but to work together to really be able to be more collaborative and to be able to really push forward this work. We're not competing, we really should be working together. So in 2016, the Belgrade Regional Conservation Alliance, now known as Seven Lakes Alliance, wrote a grant, and we got funding for 3 of our organizations that happen to be bordering each other to work together to see how could we share resources? How could we further our impact? So in this slide, you see that Belgrade Watershed is in yellow. The orange is the 30-mile river watershed, and the pink is the Cobbossee Watershed. And I'll just make this quick connection as to sort of help our sense of place. Both the Belgrade and the Cobbossee watersheds empty into the Kennebec River. And the 30-mile river watershed empties into the Androscoggin River. So it's kind of interesting, even though we share a lot of the same towns. So we got together and we had probably between 10 and 15 meetings with our conjoined staffs. And we just talked about, could we share an educator? What kind of lessons do you do? Where do you see your lessons fitting into the state learning standards? And what we found out was that the challenges of working that closely together with 3 organizations was kind of tough when we, all of our organizations, when they're fairly small, they go through a lot of changes. So that sort of prevented us from really sharing direct resources. But what we did come out of that was something I find really exciting. And that is these watershed learning principles. We talked about, okay, if we want all of our education programs to really come back to mission, then what do they have to teach? What do we want everyone in the state, whether it's an adults, because we want them to make decisions now that are going to help protect our waters, or what do we want our future stewards to know for decisions in the future? What do we want them to know? So the first point is that watersheds are topographical and ecological systems that are scalable and interconnected. So watersheds are not determined by municipality lines. They are all based on the shape of the land, and they all contain ecological systems where living and non-living things depend and are connected to each other and have impact on each other. They're also very scalable. You could look at the watershed of a small stream or a large, like the Portland Sebago Lake watershed. It's huge. And all of those are just parts of the ocean watershed. So they're very scalable, and everything downstream is impacted by what's upstream. So you cannot just protect one lake or one stream. You have to think about what's upstream to also protect that. Number 2, healthy watersheds are important for their biological, economic, and recreational value. Basically, if you can't get people just on the fact that wildlife needs these biological systems, then maybe we can get you to care because of the recreational value, enjoying being able to be out on a beautiful lake or fishing. And if that still doesn't get you, well, then how about that economic value? our Maine economy really depends on clean, healthy water systems. Number 3, human activities have, and they do, impact watersheds. So what we do on the land happens to the water. If we put fertilizer on the land, it's going into the water. If it makes plants grow on land, it's making plants grow in the water. So everything that we do can impact whether we have that connection or not. So let's make sure people do have those connections. And 4, humans can choose actions and behaviors that protect and improve watershed health, both individually and collectively. So let's give people the ideas of what can you do, what changes can you make, what behaviors can be changed to have a more positive impact. Through a workshop that I was able to do at the Maine Environmental Education Association conference back in 2020. It was March of 2020. In fact, it was like 1 week before we shut down. I was able to share those ideas with the workshop attendees. And so we were able to flesh out a little bit more. So for example, with number 2, the thought was, hey, it's not just biological and economic and recreational value, there's also cultural value as well, which I thought was a really great addition. And we also sort of extrapolated out what are the what are the ways that we can categorize the impacts on our watershed. So pollution, both point source and non-point source, invasive organisms, both plants and animals, and climate change, those changes in temperature and chemical structure, volume of water and phenology, the change of where plants are growing depending on the growing season and when animals are migrating. So lots of ways to think about and study human actions and their impacts. And then what can we really try to get people to think about? So land use decisions, preventing the introduction and spread of non-native species. I know that's something that my organization works on a lot. Water flow and use of water, atmospheric pollution, and reducing carbon footprint. This is by no means an exhaustive list. And in fact, something that I would like to see as we move forward is hopefully a more collaborative and collective group is what can we do to tweak these? And you might say, why? Why are you pushing these learning principles? And this is why. I feel like there's a lot of benefits to this. If we have some widespread agreement that this is the information that we think our citizens need for our current decision makers, to make decisions that incorporate what's important for water quality, and also for those future decision makers, which actually, to be honest, the youth are easier to sort of get these concepts across because they haven't formed some of their typical habits yet. So I think that's really important that we are arming our decision makers with the information that they need to make good choices. It's also an opportunity for us to have a universal evaluation. If we're all working towards some similar learning standards, then we can evaluate together and have a bigger idea of, are we being successful or not? It also would help us to make the case that water education should really be included in state curriculum before our students graduate from our public schools, and also build a case for support of funding our joint work, not just individual groups, but maybe going after larger amounts of funding that we can share and can make our work possible. So now I'd like to turn it over to Susan for some input on what Maine Lakes has been doing. And while she's doing that, I'm going to take a look in the chat and see what we've got for questions.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thank you. That was a great overview, and you have really pulled together some great collaborative teamwork among lots of people. So thank you for sharing that. For my little piece here, I'll just jump in and say that I mentioned at the beginning how Maine Lakes had sold the Melinda Ann, really reevaluating our our education program and you know, how do we really want to be traveling to different schools? So I posed this idea with a bunch of lake watershed organization folks, including Tamara and folks from a lot of those organizations whose logos I showed at the beginning, and posed this idea, which was not my idea. It was really had been floated by people like Tamara before, but this idea of a freshwater education collaborative. And everyone's interested. I think, you know, it's really hard to carve out time for that. And so, including myself. So it has dragged on a little bit. I've mentioned it for a couple of years now. But I did finally get, thank you to the Onion Foundation, they did provide us a discovery grant for $5,000 to get started. I had hoped to start it this spring, but we had some change in our staffing at Maine Lakes, and I just could not pull it off this spring. But the goal is to sort of more formally start this freshwater education collaborative, either late summer, early fall. It's going to build on all of those things that Tamara mentioned, that collaboration with 30 Mile and Seven Lakes and Friends of the Cobbossee. I think, you know, that as foundational work for the content. And the idea is, for this phase of the Freshwater Education Collaborative, is to get, I think we officially have to decide on a goal, but I think it's pretty clear that the goal is to have freshwater education reach every student in Maine, you know, building on equity and inclusion, making sure that every student, regardless of where they live in the state, has access. And there's and again, going back to those groups that are already doing it, like the Friends and LEA has amazing programs. Lots of those organizations that I shared do. And if you live in one of those regions, you're a lucky kid, and you get these incredible people like Cami and others coming to you, and, you know, doing amazing programs in your school. So the question really is, what do we do for everybody else? And how do we efficiently, what kind of programming we deliver? How do we do it efficiently? Specifically, so the goal this fall is to get together to get together environmental educators, teachers, really anyone who has an interest in delivering freshwater education. Bring together all of those people in a couple of facilitated meetings, sadly probably on Zoom, but I'm hoping at least have one in person, maybe one in Zoom and then one in person. But the goal is to create a framework for bringing comprehensive, accessible opportunities around freshwater ecology and science to all Maine students. So we have kind of 5 basic questions we want to ask. And this is just a first step, because as Tamara's mentioned about the sort of concepts that we want to support, but there's also like the logistics of how we make it happen. So the kind of 6 questions, I guess we have 6 questions we're looking at with this group. What resources exist for students and teachers now? How we could expand those resources geographically? What barriers exist to that expansion? And you know, freshwater education opportunities. Is it distance from an actual freshwater site? Is it funding? You know, is it teacher time? And is it, you know, teachers' limitations on time? And especially thinking about rural and underserved populations and how to get these education opportunities to them. Which grades are best? What kind of age do we want to focus on for youth? And I think one of the most exciting things for me and for Maine Lakes is asking the question about what are the educational opportunities outside of traditional classrooms, because as I mentioned, you know, when we had the boat program, our season of on-boat education is really limited. You know, if you want to do in-person on the water education, you know, the summer is really the ideal time to do it. And so the Friends of the Cobbossee obviously know that, and they have great programming in the summertime. So who are the other partners on that? Or is it lake associations? I know there's a lot of lake association folks on this call. Lake associations do amazing work. Maybe they're the delivery. Maybe they can deliver freshwater education programming to their local rec program or to a summer camp that's in their community. You know, I know of, and a great example, you know, China Lake has some amazing volunteers, and they do a poster contest every summer or every spring. And they get really involved with the schools. They do a whole piece on loons. You know, they could potentially be a model for other lake associations. So the funding we have will pay for a facilitator. It'll pay stipends for participants, especially for teachers and others who are doing who are doing this as a volunteer effort above and beyond either their regular job or who are, you know, or volunteers, you know, potentially pay mileage to get to a meeting. The funding is really to support the participants. And really the goal of those facilitated meetings is to sort of brainstorm a framework, a potential framework, and really just, there's not enough time, or definitely not enough time to finish the job, but we hope it's enough to start at number one, and then number two, to create some additional funding opportunities. So some big grants that we could go after, multi-year grants, collaborative grants, bringing in lots of partners on this. So that's kind of my quick summary of that work.
Great. I'm going to go ahead and share screen again, if that's okay, just to.
Yeah.
So that is a yes, share screen. And let's go over here. So getting back into my, here we go, and slideshow. I've learned that if I don't do it the right way, it won't show up.
Yeah,
Anywho,
that looks good. We're
okay.
back where we were.
Fantastic. So something hopefully went right. Some ideas about our next steps, just to piggyback on what Susan was saying. Doing this sort of work really helps us promote water education in the state. It also supports people who are currently or who would like to conduct water education in the state, and help us seek some shared funding to support our work. So I've created a Jamboard, which is it's just a Google Doc device or app. And so I put the link in the chat. And so if you just click on that link, it takes you to our, like, sort of, it's basically like a poster. And if you go and click on the left-hand side, there is something that looks like a little mini note. And if you click on that, it will create a new one, and you can put in your idea there and leave it there. Also, feel free to put some questions into the chat, because I'd love to know what you're really looking for. While Susan was talking, I was able to go look at who's here, and I agree, it's a lot of folks from lake associations. So I think that there might be some questions directly related to that. So I've got my information here. If you want to keep in touch or use me as a resource, I'm happy to do that. And you can always find us on the web at Friends of the Cobbossee Watershed, if you put that in your Google. And one other thing I just wanted to share with you, because after I saw that, oh, there's a lot of people here from lake associations, I just wanted to share this resource that's really pretty new. It's on the Teach Me Outside website. And so you can discover partners in your community. So down here, I actually just used it for the first time, and I put in near my location, and lo and behold, we've got a bunch near where I am, and you can zero in. Of course, I'm wondering, hey, is Friends of the Cobbossee Watershed there? Yes, we are, thank goodness. But you can go and, explore different places and what they have as far as resources and then say, hey, what are you doing if you're near my area? And how can we partner? I think that's often a really great first way if you are new to providing water education, because you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of great stuff out there. There's also things like Project WET, which Cami Wilbert, our education director, is the statewide coordinator for that. And so there's so many resources out there that we really don't have to feel like you're in a silo or doing something for the first time. There's so many people that want to help you by either connecting with you and coming and leading something themselves, or just giving you the resources so that you can do something yourself. I have to say that the Lakes community and the environmental education community could not be a more welcoming, collaborative type of group. We all are doing this because we love our lakes. So whatever, I think there's a lot of different opportunities out there.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Tamara, for all that great information. And I love that resource that you just showed. I think lake associations should find that really helpful. And I think for our Freshwater Education Collaborative, you know, that's a great, you know, all the pieces are in place, and, you know, just to start pulling them together, I think, is our goal.
And I want to make a big plug for Maine Lakes, though, because I think that I know that Susan, you were saying that Maine Lakes has to decide what its role is in this education world. And I think that that connection to the lake associations is so important, and being able to be a connector between what is happening and what's not. But hey, here's all these great resources. And of course, the amazing projects like Lake Smart is just huge. So I think between these bigger, you know, sort of statewide organizations like Maine Lakes or Maine Environmental Education Association, et cetera, we're really lucky because we have a lot of really passionate people that are pushing this work forward. So a big thank you to you, Susan, and Maine Lakes.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, if you ask me right now, I would say, I mean, and I might be wrong, you know, an educator on staff might be in our future, but if we did, I think it would be as a, to provide resources for others and help others sort of lead the charge. Much like Lake Smart, we facilitate volunteer groups to carry out Lake Smart. I imagine I see like Maine Lakes as being a resource for teachers, lake associations, you know, and my vision potentially is a website and resource where teachers can go or others can go to get lesson plans, or you know, connect with educators. You know, I mentioned there's some contractor type, you know, consultants out there who do it. Sort of how do you connect with people who can do the work for you if you're not able to do it yourself. So we'll see what actually happens. Yeah. Hopefully we'll get some big money and multi-year project to really make this happen, and then we'll come back and tell you all about the resources that we've developed, hopefully with some of your help.
Just one thing I wanted to mention, Susan, is that on the Jamboard, we did have a great sticky put up there mentioning great progress. Teacher participation is critical. I personally really like the module structure that teachers can pull and implement with support as needed. 100%, I personally 100% agree. And we certainly have our education director working very closely with teachers. And you're right, there's a lot of resources out there, but there's also a lot of pressures put on teachers. So you're right, every teacher is going to be a little bit different. And yes, we are certainly major partners with our teachers. So thank you for that comment.
Yeah. Yeah, and hopefully some of you listening will be interested, or if you know of a teacher or know of somebody with a passion for education and lakes, you know, put them in touch with Tamara or put them in touch with me at Maine Lakes, and we will pull in anybody who is interested. We would love to have your help and your insight and your experience. So with that, unless anybody wants to raise their hand and ask a question in person, you can do that. Or if you just want to share something about your experience with environmental education relating to your lake, or really any environmental education experience you want to share. We have a few minutes if anybody's brave and wants to do that. We can take your questions or your input. Okay, awesome. Tristan from Lake Stewards of Maine.
Hi.
Hi, Tristan.
How's everyone doing?
Good.
Good. Tamara, I really appreciated the presentation, and thank you for putting this on. Susan, I did have a question. With the watershed review, I wasn't necessarily part of that process as much in the early stages, and I was curious, has there been comparison look to some of the stuff that's been implemented with NOAA on sort of the metric modeling? Because I know that we don't want to reinvent wheels, and I know NOAA groups have put in a lot of work in the coastal area on trying to make sure that the metrics are really high quality. Thank you.
Do you have anything? That is out of my area expertise. But
well, and I guess I would want to just Tristan, maybe solidify what you mean about the watershed surveys, or are you talking about watershed education?
Specifically, when you were speaking to the metrics to assess how and what could be used within the watershed as part of looking at the larger framework of how that can be reviewed in communities, and how those communities might be able to interpret some of that data in a public forum.
Okay, and so I'm wondering if that was the watershed principles that we had created, or if that was more based on the information that I was covering about the community-based education, community-based environmental learning survey.
Yes, the community-based environmental learning survey.
Okay. Something I did not verbalize, but I had a small disclaimer at the bottom of one of my slides, was that these amazing people, I do not represent them, and I cannot speak to that, unfortunately. I'm just somebody showing how you can use this information. And so it was the Maine Math and Science Alliance, and they truly are amazing. So I'm sure that their standards were really great. Alex Brazili is the person that I'm really most familiar with there. And so I'm sure they had excellent standards as far as analyzing the data, but I would check it out and ask them, ask that question, because I think that would be something they'd love to speak to.
Thank you so much. That's great.
Sorry, I can't actually answer it.
No, that's great. I mean, just having more information and bringing this to my attention, because this was not something I was aware of. So thank you.
Oh, good. Great.
I just have a quick question, Tamara. If the climate change education bill was successful, and I think it's something like $2 million, I think, coming. And my understanding, was it 8? Okay.
No, for the state.
Oh yeah,
I think it was over $1 million, but I'm not sure if it was 2.
Yeah. Money coming for climate change education. And if I'm putting you on the spot, that's okay. I just wondered, I mean, you don't have to answer. We can look it up, but it was for teacher education around climate change.
Yeah, I believe
education.
so.
So one of the ongoing sort of beefs I have with climate education and climate change education is lakes never get mentioned. It's always coastal, like all of the, I followed all the climate policy stuff that went on last year. And, there's a lot of flags waved around the coastal sea and they're all completely legitimate. Sea level rise and coastal communities and flooding and so many things. You know, the change in trees and the change in species as the climate changes. And the group they did have a chapter on lakes in their scientific assessment of climate change for Maine. But you know, Maine lakes are really at risk from climate change.
They are.
So do you know anything about the curriculum that will be part of that climate change education?
I do not at this point. I will say that I know that Maine Environmental Education Association is it's very in tune to this. And certainly we're very supportive of those who are our representatives to federally to get that money. I will say that I feel as though my role is as a squawker. I just keep bringing up the fact that watershed education, lakes education, freshwater is so important. And so I do that as a board member on MIA. I know I'm constantly talking to you, Susan, about, you know, water education. And so I think that this is a real opportunity. And I wish that I, as Friends of the Cobbossee Watershed, had the capacity, but we don't. You know, we're out there protecting a particular group of lakes. So that's where I think your organizations working together is so important. And so whatever I can do to be some connective tissue for that. But you're right, we all have to jump on it, right?
Yeah, well, and we can certainly motivate our squawkers to speak up. So we should be in touch about that. And we should definitely, I mean, we didn't mention climate change specifically in what we talked about today, but you know, that would definitely be on the table sort of for freshwater education is, and
except
I think
that we did include it in the watershed principles. So climate change certainly is something that's very important. And I think that for our kids and folks who live inland and don't even get to the ocean, you can see the results of and test climate change on our lakes. I mean, the fact that our lakes are icing out sooner makes those invasive plants grow sooner. We're gonna be plant surveying earlier than we've ever done. So it certainly is concerning.
Okay, well, hopefully, you know, this recognition that climate change education is important will help with freshwater education. They go kind of hand in hand. So
we'll squawk until we do.
I like it. All right, it's 5:02. So thanks everybody for sticking with us to the end. Thank you, Tamara, so much for doing this great presentation, and hopefully we'll see most of you, and hopefully you'll be back to hear Jeremy Deeds, not the executive director, who is not the executive director of Cobbossee Watershed.
Nervous about my job. Thank you, everybody, and feel free to reach out if you have anything you want to talk about.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you. Take care.